The following video are my thoughts and opinions on the freeze dryer unit called the Cube. And I just want to be clear and upfront that I do not own a Cube and I have never used a Cube. All my observations and comments are either from observation, reviewing the service and owner's manual on the Cube, talking to the customer service people representing the Cube, and from basically common sense. If you take a look at a side-by-side comparison of the Cube compared to the Harvest Right freeze dryer, you can see that they are quite alike. And it has made me wonder if some of the people who helped develop the Harvest Right freeze dryer also helped develop the Cube freeze dryer. If we strip away the chassis and just take a look at the chamber, the Cube gets its name from a square chamber. If you take a look at the Harvest Right chamber, which is round, this has many advantages to it. When pressure is exerted upon the Harvest Right chamber, the pressure is transferred around the edges of the round chamber, much like a chicken's egg would be. Whereas when you take a look at the pressure being exerted against the Cube, there's a tendency for the flat sections of the Cube to bend inwards. This is referred to as oil canning, which takes its name from the old-fashioned oil cans that you'd take your thumb on the bottom of the can and you'd squeeze it and it would make this little knocking sound and would dispense the oil. But oil canning is an issue when it comes to flat pieces of metal that have forces applied upon them. The shape of the chamber is important. For example, if we take a look at the shape of a submarine is round to withstand the hull pressures exerted upon it at very deep space. If a sub was square, it would not have the ability to dive very deep without the hull being crushed. Another example would be the St. Louis Archway, the gate to the west. This is round in shape because a round object can withstand pressures that square objects cannot stand. So that is why the gateway to the west is not rectangular in shape. Another issue to take a look at is the capacity of the freeze dryers and to store ice. If we strip away the chassis, we can take a look at the basic shape between the Cube and the Harvest Right freeze dryer. If we highlight the area where ice storage is available, the Harvest Right freeze dryer has much more space to store ice, and that is very important to consider when it comes to sublimation. If we take a look at the Cube, and because I never had one to actually measure, I can only approximate that the distance between the shelf unit and the chamber wall is probably about 3/4 of an inch. And this basically leads itself to limited storage for the ice against the chamber wall. This issue is concerning to me when it comes to sublimation. During the freeze drying cycle, as moisture is removed from the food through sublimation, the moisture will freeze against the chamber wall. And as the heaters on the shelves turn on, the heaters will in turn heat up the shelf assembly, which in turn will heat the trays, which will heat the food. And as the food is heated, moisture will escape through sublimation and become a vapor within the chamber. And as that vapor touches the chamber walls, it will freeze. But as the freezing increases and the ice on the chamber wall thickens, on the Cube chamber, there's a possibility of the ice actually touching the shelf assembly. And as the ice touches the shelf assembly, that ice is going to sublimate, much like the sublimation coming out of the food. And so moisture or water vapor will leave the chamber wall and become free floating inside the chamber itself. This will increase humidity and decrease vacuum, which will make the freeze-drying cycle less efficient. The cube uses humidity sensors to alert you when the food is ready. Now, as long as the ice in the cube does not touch the shelf assembly, this would be a good way of determining if the food is ready or not. But if the ice in the cube touches the shelf assembly and becomes sublimated, this is going to give a false reading whether or not the food is ready. So if there's a constant sublimation between the ice touching the shelf, the cycle could go on for hours when the food would already be dry. Another concern I have is the amount of heat the cube will be able to express to the outside. Harvest Right has a refrigeration pump and condenser contained inside their cabinet. The cube has a refrigeration pump, condenser, and a vacuum pump all enclosed inside the cabinet in one location. The cube appears to have about the same amount of holes in the cabinet as a Harvest Right freeze dryer does that allows this heat to escape. The cube pulls 1,725 watts of heat, or to put that into BTUs, 5,882. This is a great amount of heat that only has a limited area for the heat to disperse. Contained within the owner's manual of the cube are the following statements concerning customer misuse. Improperly determining dryness of the food is customer misuse. But if there's a constant cycle of sublimation of ice against the chamber wall and the shelf assembly, well, that's really not the fault of the customer, but poor design. Another issue is operating the home freeze dryer system without enough airflow space around the cube. They're recommending 4 inches. This, once again, is not so much as a customer issue, but a design issue, because the makers of the cube have chose to put all components inside the cabinet with very little ventilation. The last concern I have with the cube is the vacuum pump. The cube has chosen to use an oil-free vacuum pump. When I contacted the makers of the cube, they were not able or not willing to tell me what type of vacuum pump was being used, although the vacuum pump is an oil-less vacuum pump, and this concerns me. In commercial freeze drying, there is a cold trap between the chamber and the vacuum pump. The cold trap is used to trap any excess moisture that can escape the chamber so it doesn't go into the vacuum pump and to damage it. The Harvest Right and the cube does not use a cold trap. So in both of these examples, there is a certain amount of moisture that can escape the chamber that will go into the vacuum pump. The moisture that does go into the vacuum pump on the pH scale is acidic. And this acidic moisture does have the ability to corrode internal parts of a vacuum pump. Now, with a standard vane vacuum pump, such as the premium vacuum pump that Harvest Right offers, the internal parts are bathed in oil, and the oil can help sweep out any corrosion during an oil change. But on an oilless vacuum pump, the oil protection is not present. Acidic moisture entering an oilless vacuum pump can remain in the vacuum pump, causing corrosion and other damage. And because the vacuum pump for the cube is inside and hard to get to, this makes the problem more problematic. I do want to make something perfectly clear that I do not work for Harvest Right, nor do I get paid by Harvest Right. These opinions are my 2 cents on the cube, and like I said earlier, I have never worked with the cube and not had the opportunity to tear a cube apart to look inside. Would I buy a cube? Probably not. One of the differences between the cube and the Harvest Right freeze dryer is the amount of food you can put on a tray. The cube recommends 1 layer, where in the Harvest Right freeze dryer you can pretty much put much more food on each tray. From a design and engineering standpoint, I would not order a cube, nor would I use a cube, because I believe it has many design flaws. Now, this could serve as an open letter to the manufacturers of the cube, and I would really like them to respond to my criticism of their product, that perhaps both of us can be educated, and perhaps I'm missing the point. But anyway, that's my thoughts. That's my 2 cents. I hope I've enlightened you, and I'm looking forward to being corrected if correction needs to be made. Thank you for your time. I hope you subscribe to my channel, and as always, go forth and freeze dry the world.